Welcome back. In this video, we are going to create a node that will generate a load of different roughness maps that can be used across many different materials to adjust the roughness of your current shader. Okay, so I'm back in the nodegroups.blend file, which is the file that I've saved in my asset browser in the node groups folder, and it's where I'm saving all of these different node groups. At the moment, I still have the metal material that I created in the last video with the surface distortion node, and this is going to be used as the basis to test this roughness map. It makes sense that we just continue working on this piece of metal and slowly build up more detail on it using all these different generators. So I'm just going to move these nodes out of the way. I'm going to take the texture coordinate node and I'm going to put it up here though. So as far as roughness goes, at the moment we have this pretty low roughness on this material, giving it quite a reflective finish. So let's make it even less reflective with some roughness maps. So we're going to start off with a noise texture. This is generally the most useful node that you're going to use to create roughness maps, but we're also going to use some Musgrave and even a wave texture. So let's just create a basic generic noise texture. So let's use this generated node and plug this in here. In fact, we might even be better using object mapping. So let's actually just use Control to move this across to object mapping. Now we will have to adjust this slightly. Let's take this scale down quite a bit. Let's take that down to about 0.1. And we'll use this noise texture. So at the moment, this is what we have. We want to just adjust this a little bit. Let's take the scale down. This is going to be quite a cloudy texture. Let's take the detail up to 15. And the roughness, I think, can stay where it is. Adding a little bit of distortion gives almost like a swirling pattern. And this can be really good for giving the impression that a piece of material has been wiped and it's left smudges and smeared, and the roughness is affected that way. So I quite like the look of the distortion there, but obviously we can include this in the input and have that as an option to turn on or off that swirling pattern. Now, one thing about this noise texture is we don't have much contrast in there, so I will add in a map range node. And for this map range node, let's just take the min and max values and kind of squeeze them down a little bit. So let's take this min value to about 0.3 and the max value to about 0.8. This just gives us more contrast in our node. So at the moment we have this fairly contrasty, swirly pattern, and let's use this as our roughness map so we can see what our result is. And at the moment we're getting this. Now, we don't have any control over how much of this noise texture is going into our roughness. At the moment we're essentially getting 100% of this output. So we have to set up a system where each of our different noise textures, Musgrave textures, etc. can be individually added or removed from our noise. We're going to do that with some mix nodes. So let's grab a mix color node. We're going to plug this in here. Now by default this is going to jump into slot A. We actually want this in slot B. And instead of mix, we're going to use lighten. So the reason that we're going to use lighten is if we take the factor all the way down, and let's actually just change slot A back to a very reflective roughness, essentially 0. As we increase our factor, we get more and more of this noise texture on our material, and therefore it's affecting the roughness more. Now, because we're using lighten, if we have a value in here that's say 0.05, if we have our factor at 0, we don't affect that value. And as we increase this 0.05 value will never get darker, which means we essentially have a base roughness going into slot A. Now this is really useful because what we can actually do is we can use this as one of our inputs for our base roughness. So if we already have a roughness map on our material, we can plug that directly into our base roughness input, and then we're only adding roughness to it. We'll never make anything more shiny, which is exactly the way we want this map to work. So we've added one type of roughness map, we're going to make this node a lot more complex and have several different types of roughness map. So this time I'm going to go with a Musgrave texture, and once again we'll use object mapping for that. Now let's look at our result. Now for this one, what I want to do is I want to actually use 4D texture, and we're going to use multifractal. Now for this, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to take this scale down a little bit to make it a little bit more cloudy. The detail, we're going to pump up all the way to 15. Dimension, we're going to take down to 0, and you can see we're getting some noise in there. And the lacunarity, as you can see, is a scale. If we take it to a certain amount, you can get this effect. So let me make that pretty extreme. Now, this is an effect that we definitely don't want on our noise map, but luckily, because we're using 4D, we have this W value. We can just increase that, and that actually gets rid of that effect, and it gives us something a lot nicer. Now, this value here, you can change to whatever you want. After it gets to a certain amount, it's almost like a seed value, where it doesn't really affect the noise texture that much. It's only when it's quite close to 0 that we start getting this strange peating, stretching effect, which you definitely don't want in your material. So after you get to about 1 or so, this value just becomes a seed value. Now, lacunarity, as you can see, this increases or decreases the kind of level of noise, the graininess of that noise. So this is a value that we're going to be able to use to get either a really fine noise or something a little bit more contrasty, a little bit larger. Now, we're just going to duplicate this lighten node and plug this in here. And we'll take the factor down on both of those. So at the moment with 0 factor, we're just getting this grey colour here that's in slot A. If we go to this lighten node with the factor at 0, we're still getting this grey node. We'll plug this height into slot B, and if we increase this factor, you can see more of that roughness coming in. So let's have a look at that effect. So this is just with a little bit of this effect, and it's not looking too bad. We can increase that a little bit more, make it more extreme. You can see we can get some extreme rough material. Let's take that down. Let's add another Musgrave texture. We're just going to use Ctrl-Shift-D, move that down. Now for this Musgrave texture, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to use FBM. Let's look at our result, and you can see this is much more contrasty. This is almost like a grunge map. Again, for the scale, we're going to take this way down. We're going to take that down to 0.1, because this is going to give us large patches of roughness. The detail again, fully up at 15, dimension at 0, that's fine. Lacunarity we'll take to something like 2, that gives us a little bit more roughness. And we have now a much higher scale noise. Again, we can use W to just slightly affect this. You can see that doesn't have too much of an effect on the overall pattern. It just kind of shifts it a little bit. So again, that will work a little bit like a seed value. Again, we're just going to do the same thing. We'll duplicate that across and plug this into slot B. Let's have a look at that map on our material. So you can see a bit of a larger scale. Now, obviously, we can start combining some of these different noise values to get something that's a little bit more complex. And that's the whole point of this node. It's to very quickly have a whole bunch of sliders just to really customize a nice roughness map. Let's do one more Musgrave texture. Let's duplicate this down again. Make sure it's plugged in. For this one again, let's do FBM. Let's take the scale up a little bit. Let's actually make sure we're seeing the result. And this is going to be quite an interesting one, I think. Let's take that scale to about 0.45. The detail we're going to take down. I'm going to take this down quite a bit. Let's take it down to about 4. And we're getting something quite cloudy there. Let's take the dimension up a little bit. So we're getting something with slightly smoother edges there, which we'll adjust more in a little bit. Let's take the lacunarity up a little bit as well. So you can see we're getting this kind of strange, kind of cloudy pattern happening. Let's take that to about 3.5, I think. And just to smooth off the edges of this a little bit more, let's use a map range node. So we've looked at map range node a few times, but one thing that we've not really went into too much is changing from linear to a different interpolation type. If I take this to smoother step, that just breaks up this edge a little bit, makes it a little bit more smooth, and it's going to make this map work a little bit better. Again, we'll duplicate this lighten node, and we'll plug this in. Look at our result, and let's add a little bit of this on. So here we're just getting some kind of random cloudy areas on our roughness map. And again, we're really going to be building up this roughness map by using several of these different values. So you can use these as much or as little as you like. And things are getting a little bit more complex, a little bit more realistic. Okay, one more map. I think we'll do it. So let's add in a wave texture. So using a wave texture seems like a kind of strange idea because of the way the wave works. I mean, how do you get some interesting noise using this wave texture? Well, if we set this to rings, and we set the ring direction to spherical, we get this pattern, which is going to be a lot easier to work with. We're going to take the scale. We're actually going to make the scale pretty small. Let's take that down to about 0.2 or so. Now this is where we get an interesting noise texture. Let's take this sine value and turn it to saw. And this gives us more contrasting edges to our wave texture. Let's take this detail all the way up to 15. And let's take this distortion up quite a bit. So you can see as we take this up, we start getting all these different layers. Now I'm going to take this to something like 40, around about 40. Detail scale, again, I'm going to take that up, and you can see as we take this up, we start to get these little patches, and these can look really good, especially if we have a little bit more roughness in there. You can see how that starts breaking up those patterns a lot more. And we're starting to get a really nice effect there. You can see if we zoom right in, we're getting a lot of cloud, we're getting a lot of rough edges and patches, and we're getting a nice variation of different values. Now this is a really nice roughness map that can almost give the effect of water damage. I've found rust as well can be really good for doing things like that. Let's grab this lighting node and plug this in. Let's look at our result, and let's just look at just this last one. So you can see we're getting a nice kind of tarnished metal effect there. Maybe a kind of water damage effect. And this can look really nice. And again, we can start adding some more of these maps in as well. Adjust some of those different values a little bit. We can take this original roughness, even make it more shiny, just to bring the contrast of things up a little bit. Now, just using this node, we can create some really nice effects. Okay, so it's challenge time. So your challenge in this video is just to try and create one or more interesting noise maps. You can use similar techniques to the ones we've already used in this video. You can use a noise texture, you can use a Musgrave texture, you could use a wave texture, or maybe you want to try something different, such as a Voronoi texture. And remember, you can combine any of those noise textures using another colour mix node. Once you've completed a nice noise texture, daisy chain it into the node tree using another colour mix node set to lighten. So pause the video, have a go at that, and join me in the next video where I'll create one more noise texture, and then we'll take this entire node tree and turn it into a single node group to generate our roughness maps. I'll see you then.